Welcome back. We are going to be talking about the integument today. The integument is the focus of Chapter 5 in the OpenStax textbook. And the integument, or also referred to here as the integumentary system, is the largest organ system in the human body. Up to 16% of your body's mass is consisting of the integument, so that by far qualifies it as the largest organ system. And the integumentary system includes your skin, and your accessory structures of the skin, such as hair and nails. And so today, in this lecture, I'll be talking about a broad overview of the integument and then also focus on one of the layers of the integument. So I'll talk about that momentarily. The main overall function of the integumentary system is protection. And so it provides protection against abrasion, it provides protection against water loss, and it provides protection against the onslaught of things like bacteria and other infectious agents. So it provides a barrier to the external environment so as to give you a first layer of protection for your immune system. The skin consists of three main parts, and if we list these from the most superficial to the deepest, the most superficial is the epidermis. That's actually what's facing the outside of your body, the epidermis. If you touch your skin, you're touching your epidermis. And actually, the rest of this lecture will focus on the layers of the epidermis. And then my next videos will focus on the dermis and the hypodermis and other related things. But in this particular lecture, we're going to expand upon the details of the epidermis. So if we take a quick look at the epidermis, of the skin, you see these layers that we just talked about. Out here in this light color is the epidermis, and then below in this dark pink color, all throughout here, would be the dermis, and then the bottom layer here, which kind of look like these oddly shaped plump cells, these are adipose cells, and this is actually the hypodermis. So down here you have the hypodermis, hypo meaning below, and hypodermis, below the dermis, right? Below the dermis. And then this is the dermis here in dark pink, and the epidermis. Epi means on top of. And so epidermis, on top of the dermis. This is the epidermis. And we're going to talk about the epidermis in this lecture and then go on to be to another video lecture to talk about the dermis and the things that are going on within the dermis and the hypodermis. So let's begin with features of the epidermis. So the epidermis actually consists of several distinct layers of stratified cells. The only exception is the stratum basale, which is really not stratified. It's really a single layer. I'll talk about that in a minute. But mostly what you're talking about in the epidermis are stratified squamous epithelial cells. And I know that you've learned that in a previous chapter, in chapter 4. So I wanted you to remember that that's the kind of tissue we're talking about. Now the epidermis is entirely avascular. It has no blood vessels in it. And so that's just an interesting fact about the epidermis. So if we list the layers of cells, the stratification of the epidermis, and we list this from the most deep to the most superficial, the deepest layer is the stratum basale. We'll talk about that more in a moment. After that, the next layer up towards the surface is the stratum spinosum. After that, the stratum granulosum. The stratum lucidum may or may not, skin may or may not have this particular stratum. If it's thick skin, it will have it. And you only find thick skin on the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet. But if that's where you're looking, you will find the stratum lucidum. If you're looking anywhere else on your skin, it will lack this layer. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then finally, the outermost layer is the stratum corneum. And so all of these layers, except for the stratum basale, again, this is kind of a special layer we'll talk about in a moment. But if you looked at the stratum spinosum, granulosum, lucidum, and corneum, these are all generally referred to as keratinocytes. And this owes to the fact that they produce a ton of this intracellular protein called keratin. So keratin is an intracellular fibrous protein, and it makes up the heart of all the nails, the hair on your body, and your skin. And so these are called keratinocytes. Again, not necessarily the stratum basale. So let's see how this works. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through quickly these layers and see how the epidermis actually functions. So let's begin down here in the stratum basale. And although this looks like there might be 2 or 3 layers, in fact, the stratum basale, which are kind of these dark gold cells here, really would be just a single layer of cells thick. And these cells are kind of stem cells. They are stem cells, constantly going through mitotic divisions and producing the other keratinized cell types above. So the stratum basale, these cells are going through constant mitotic divisions and producing new cells that get pushed upward through the layers of the epidermis. So this cell, for example, right here, would have previously been found in the stratum lucidum, previously been found in the stratum granulosum, previously found in the stratum spinosum, and previously it was formed here in the stratum basale. Okay, so here's the way it works. Stratum basale, you're getting mitotic divisions. New cells are formed and they work their way up as new cells are formed behind them through these layers. And we're going to talk about these layers in sequence. But before we move on past the stratum basale, I want to talk about a couple of other things. Within this layer, which lies right above the dermis, this is the dermis down here. So this layer right above the dermis is the stratum basale. You will also find 2 other kinds of cells. One is this cell called a melanocyte, which produces melanin, which gives the skin its pigmentation. And I'll have more to say in a later lecture about that. But along with the melanocytes, you will also find these cells, here pictured in blue, called Merkel cells. And Merkel cells are receptors. They receive stimuli, in this case touch stimuli, and they pass it along to the brain by stimulating these sensory neurons, which will carry that information back to the brain. So if there's any kind of pressure here, touch to the skin, the Merkel cell will sense that and send that back up to the brain to say, hey, I just got touched. So anyway, that's the stratum basale. Okay, above that is the stratum spinosum. And again, these are keratinocytes, and everything above would also be considered keratinocytes. What they're doing 2 main things. The nuclei here prominently shown in these cells are constantly producing messenger RNA, sending out a message to make the protein keratin. And these cells are filling up with intracellular keratin. The other thing they're doing is they're making some extracellular membrane-bound proteins that make up these tight junctions called desmosomes. So really important. You remember those from chapter 4. Desmosomes are these intracellular connections that are being produced here. And it gives the stratum spinosum some mechanical integrity. So if the skin were to be pushed and pulled and stretched, they don't pull apart from one another because they're very tightly held to the next cell right outside. So that's what these keratinocytes are doing, these stratum spinosum. Now, the stratum spinosum is anywhere between 8 and 10 cell layers thick. And it's after the cells make their way up through these 8 to 10 cell layers thick, they will enter into what is called the stratum granulosum. And what's going on here is, notice the nuclei are beginning to get smaller. Okay, they're actually disintegrating at this time as they're producing one more kind of protein called keratohyalin, Kerato hyalin, A-L-I-N, keratohyalin. And so this protein accumulates in little granules within the cytoplasm, and that's what those little spots are that you see here, these little granulated spots. And so the keratohyalin is something you find in the stratum granulosum that you don't find in the stratum spinosum. The keratohyalin is very, very important for giving more integrity to the cell and more waterproofness to the cell as well. Now, you'll notice that the stratum granulosum is about 3 to possibly as many as 5 cell layers thick, 3 to 5 cell layers thick. And then again, if these cells are in the soles of the feet or the palms of the hand, you will find this layer, the stratum lucidum. And the stratum lucidum, if you notice, all of the organelles, the nuclei are completely disintegrated, just little ghosts of them left over, and all you have in here now is a ton of keratin, keratohyalin, and also another kind of protein called eleiden, E-L-E-I-D-E-N, which is a lipoprotein that is synthesized from the keratohyalin. So that's what these cells are filled with. And if they're filled with this elidin, it makes them highly, highly waterproof because of that lipoprotein. And again, that's why they're found in the soles of the feet and the palms of the hand, because you need that waterproofness there. Okay. In thin skin, you would go straight from the stratum granulosum and cells would become stratum corneum. In thick skin, like the soles and the palms, you're going to get the stratum lucidum. In any event, that every skin type will have the stratum corneum, and these cells are all completely dead cells. They're just stuffed full of keratin, keratohyalin, and they are giving you lots of protection from abrasion. There's anywhere between 15 and 30 cell layers here, and I know you don't see that here in this picture, but that's what your stratum corneum can have, up to 30 cell layers thick. And this stratum corneum, just to give you an idea of the rate of replacement, the full stratum corneum can be replaced once a month. So if you think of that, that means a new cell layer every day is being produced. So if 30 cell layers can be completely replaced in 1 month, every day a new cell layer in the stratum corneum, and eventually you'll slough every one of these off, replace them within 1 month. So that's how your epidermis is functioning.